Hello, I'm Hanif Baharuddin. You're tuned into the show that brings you closer to the people and places of our capital city. LFKL has spent its fair share of conversations talking about different branches of architecture, and one angle that we have focused on is making spaces more accessible for different people and communities. To continue that theme, this episode will look at kindergartens, the various types that are available in Malaysia, and what should be the priority when it comes to designing kindergartens that will facilitate the growth and development of children in a more ideal manner. Joining me to help unpack the topic is Ali Sabrina Ismail. She's an associate professor from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, and she has spent considerable time conducting research on kindergartens and the way they're designed here in the country.
My research currently, what I'm doing is that a lot of focus on early childhood education, which is early childhood learning. And I would like to start with a quote by Maria Montessori, who is actually the founder of the Montessori kindergarten. What is the sentence the word that she mentioned was that the goal of early childhood education should be to activate the child's own natural desire to learn. So if you really understand the phrase and the wording by Maria Montessori, what she means was that kindergarten is actually the foundation of a child's formal learning. So in kindergarten is where the children learn seamlessly about life before they transit into the school environment and then becoming adulthood or becoming matured in life. So it is very, very important that we need to look on the issue of kindergarten, because kindergarten is the early childhood care and education where it is more than preparation for a primary school, or you go to secondary school, or you go to university. Because in general, when we talk about kindergarten, it aims at building a holistic development of a child's social, emotional, cognitive, physical needs at an early stage in order to build a more solid and broad kind of a foundation for well-being for a person. So, and at the end, when we have a very strong base, a very strong hold of this one, the child will possibly turn and nurture themselves to become more kind of a caring, capable, responsible future citizens of Malaysia. So this is very important. And when I say about kindergarten, because kindergarten is where actually it injects the early pedagogy of learning, Hanif. And in this sense, when we talk about the early pedagogy of learning, it is very, very crucial the way how we design the environment for the kindergarten, especially for the children. And because this early childhood learning should be carefully prepared and specially designed, looking into a lot of aspects, which means that the children's sensory sensitivity, how they can behave themselves, self-exploration, self-discovery, and things like that. So, because without this stronghold of early childhood, we cannot build a human at the end of the day.
All right, so your research also focuses specifically on various types of kindergarten available here, especially in relation to how they're designed, right? So maybe you can help break it down for us in terms of the types of kindergartens that are available here, and in terms of how you've identified it.
Yep, okay. In Malaysia, management and operational wise, there are actually two types of institutions that cater to early childhood education. The first one is that we have the childcare nurseries or centers, or known as TASCA in the Malay word, and then where it enrolls children below 4 years old. And then we have the preschool kindergartens, which is the TADIKA, that admits children between the age of 4 to go up to 5 years old, or to go up to 6 years old. And then 7 years old, they go to primary school, which is standard 1. And TASCA usually is under the care of the Department of Social Welfare of Malaysia. It's under also the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development. And then whereas TADIKA actually is a very formal kind of a structured learning kind of early childhood education, where it is actually based on the National Preschool Standard Curriculum. And TADIKA is actually governed under 3 ministries. We have the Ministry of Education, MOE. We have the Ministry of Rural and Regional Development. And also, when we look into the TADIKA also and the TASCA, in terms of operational and management wise also, it can be under the government operation, which is under the public management, and it can also be under the private agencies or voluntary organization. But whatever it is, whether it goes under the public or government operation, private agencies, or under voluntary organization, all of these early childhood education centers need to be registered under the Ministry of Education.
Oh, even though they're privately run.
Yes, they need to be registered, and the Ministry of Education will monitor in terms of how they run the kindergarten, in terms of how they manage, in terms of the curriculum, in terms of the pedagogy and things like that. This is to ensure the quality in terms of the early children learning education. Yeah.
Oh, there are private kindergartens out there that have different syllabus as well, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you can have like Montessori, you can have like those who are actually looking to Kumon, like Waldorf kind of a method learning of pedagogy. But whatever it is, in Malaysian context, everything is still have to be monitored under the MOE, to ensure the quality. Similar like if you go to higher learning education, all education in Malaysia is monitored under the MQA, Malaysian Quality Assurance. So in this sense, we can the MOE will monitor the product and the outcome in terms of the children well-being.
All right, going back to the way these places are designed, architecturally speaking, do you see any difference in terms of, like, for example, the difference between a Tasca and a Tadika, perhaps?
Yeah, of course there are differences, because if you look into Tasca is into more nursery children, like more under the age of 4 years old. So it is more like need a very detail in terms of the caring, in terms of the caregivers, in terms of the attention and things like that. But if you go to Tadika is a higher kind of an age among the children, which is between 4 to 6 years old. So at this kind of a stage, the children are not fully independent, but they have this ability in terms of cognitive development, in terms of learning and in terms of understanding certain things. So this is very crucial and important, why I'm saying that compared to Tasca, Tadika has a very important role, because this stage is where you need stimulation in terms of children learning to cultivate their understanding about certain things and how they view the paradigm, or how they view the world before they go to the primary school or secondary school. So, but before I went into your question about Tadika and the design scheme, right? I would like to take an example first, the best practice of Tadika or kindergarten at the global context. And then we will look back into the Malaysian scenario, if that's fine with you, Hanif.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we look into Sweden, Finland, and Japan, Sweden, Finland, and Japan is actually considered as one of the best kindergarten education in the world, especially Finland. They have the very best education system. And if you look into the Finnish kind of early childhood education, the pedagogical approach in Finnish is looking more into phenomenon-based learning. So it is not looking into more like theoretical kind of a learning experience. So if you look into Finnish curriculum, it is designed towards best practices that actually embedded with the built environment in order to promote the children's optimal learning and development. So in this sense, all of the most preschools in Finland were redesigned and adopt this idea of open and flexible design layout. So because they talk about effective and collaborative learning and enhancing the children's development. So in this sense, if you go to most of their kindergarten, they adopt this idea of a classroom learning environment where it is an open planning, where it is no longer looking into the traditional kind of a desk-bound setting, and they used a lot of movable furniture where it actually allowed the children themselves to merge themselves or to work themselves in more kind of a flexible kind of a learning environment. And this is very important because flexible kind of a learning spaces or environment actually will promote creativity and encourage children in terms of to have their own independent thinking and learning, to explore, to express themselves, to be physically active within the space. And they have a bigger space to mingle around, in that sense. And this will actually promote creativity at the early stage of learning. Okay. I'm taking another examples like in Japan. Okay, in Japan, the pedagogy of early childhood education is based on the concept of zest of life. Zest of life is where they actually enhance or emphasize on the idea of humanity, looking into the positive attitude. So in Japan, they're actually looking into the theory of education through environment. So environment, it plays an important role, which means environment like outdoor, indoor spaces is all talking about nature and how you bring nature through learning and expose nature into understanding and learning among the children. So this is actually develop their behavior and understanding. So when we look into these countries like Japan, Sweden, and also Finland, they are more looking into child-centered education, Hanif. So it is not on teacher-based. But this is quite different when I bring back to the issue in Malaysia, because if you look into the Malaysian kind of a base education, it is more into teacher-centered base. So teacher-centered base here meaning that everything is depending on the teacher, rather than give the independence to the children to think and how to come up with their own activities and things like that. So like Reggio Emilia, Montessori, Waldorf, this is where all the different sets of philosophies and pedagogies developed all along the years of kindergarten learning, understanding children behavior, where they make the classroom as the third teacher. So which means that the student actually known as student-centered learning at the early age. Yeah.
All right. So do you think that indirectly affects the way we design our classrooms as well, to be more focused on the concept of, I guess, learning from a teacher of sorts?
Yeah, because I think most of kindergarten in Malaysia is actually, I'm not trying to say that it's like segregating or segmented the thinking of the early childhood. But if we look into, I'm talking from the point of view, not into looking into the pedagogy and the curriculum. I'm looking into the design aspects, from the architectural design aspects. Because if we look into the architecture design aspects, most of kindergarten in Malaysia is actually fall under these three kind of typologies. Okay, number one, whether the kindergarten might be built on a proprietary site, on a given land where it becomes a single building type. The second one is the type of a kindergarten where it inhabits a dwelling building, like existing terrace house or bungalow house, and they turn it to become a kindergarten, a learning place for children. And then we have rented space. Rented space is like shop lots, commercial area, and they turn that to become a space for children to play. So this kind of inhabited dwelling buildings, and rented space where the problem arises. Because when we have this kind of spaces at the first with a different function, for instance, the early function is supposed to be a commercial, like shop house. And then suddenly when you rent the space and you turn it to become a children learning spaces for kindergarten or for TASCA, this will actually provide a non-comfortable learning environment. And in this sense, it will give problem in terms of thermal comfort, in terms of lighting, because shop houses are designed as commercial space, where you have a rentable space, where you have a storeroom and things like that, where you need to actually showcase products and things like that. But learning environment is different. And especially when you talk about early childhood, learning environment need to be fun, it has to have a kind of a concept like I mentioned earlier, where in Finland, they talk about open planning layout, where it's a big space where children can run about, where children can develop their own thinking, creative learning, movement in terms of cognitive and things like that, in terms of physical abilities and things like that. But when shop houses is turned into become a kindergarten, so the space becomes small. Okay, and some more, whenever the classroom, it is actually placed with partitions. When you have partitions, you block the lighting. And when we look into shop lots only have ventilation from the front and from the back, right? From the side, there's usually walls actually divide because on the next door neighbor is actually another shops. So this is where there's not enough ventilation. There's not enough lighting coming in. And the space is very tight and very limited. So at the end of the day, the children also don't have outdoor space to play. So most of them playing indoor. So when you're playing indoor, using this kind of lighting, what we call that, specific lighting, electrical lighting and things like that without the natural sunlight. So this is actually limits in terms of the children behaviors, and action and thinking like that. Yeah.
That was Ali Sabrina Ismail, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia. We'll have more after the short break. Stay tuned. I'm Hanif Baharuddin and you're listening to I Love KL on BFM 89.9. BFM 89.9, you're listening to I Love KL, bringing you closer to the people and places of our capital city. I'm Hanif Baharuddin. I'm joined by Ali Sabrina Ismail via Zoom. She's an Associate Professor at the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, and she's here to talk about how kindergartens are designed in Malaysia after conducting research on the matter. We've spent the first half of the show breaking down different types of kindergartens available in Malaysia, and one of the popular types that's pretty prominent is kindergarten that operates in shop lots. Why is this a popular option among kindergarten operators? Alice explains.
Shop lots become popular, I think, in the 1980s, because this is where we call when residential starts to grow, kawasan perumahan starts to open up, new urban settlements starts to open up, and they have shop lots. So this is where the problem of when we designed residential areas, the developers, the architects, they did not think about spaces for children, So at the end of the day, when we have a lot of residential areas, we have a lot of urbanites, families who works, mothers, fathers who works all the time, where actually you want to send your kids. So at the end of the day, this become advantageous to commercial kind of a development, where they build shop lots, and shop lots take the place becoming an education center. So that's why you can see now a lot of kindergartens, rent the shop lots and turn it to become learning spaces because it's easier because shop lots are nearby to the homes, nearby to the residential. So when the parents come back from work and things like that, they can easily drop by, at shops in front of their houses. They can pick up their son or daughters and bring them back home. So this is where I'm saying that the problem starts in terms of designing space for people, because when we design a community, a living dwelling or development, you have to think about spaces not only for the grown-up, for the adults, but also for the kids. Where do they go to school? We have specific schools for primary and secondary, but there is no specific land to build for kindergarten. Am I right, Hani?
Yeah, true. But then you also see kindergartens that use houses, such as bungalow or a corner lot to be also made into kindergartens, right? Do you think that this is a slightly better alternative compared to shop lots?
Well, there is no better alternative, Hanif. The problem is still the same in terms of functionality, in terms of comfort and things like that. When I did my research, we did go to a lot of samples of kindergartens throughout Malaysia, from the shop lot, to kindergarten that actually rent residential housing dwellings. They share the same kind of a problem, because the problem is that when a kindergarten is actually built, rent a dwelling or terrace house, even though the space is a little bit bigger, you might have a porch, you might have a little garden at the front, but at the end of the day, the emotional parameters needs for the children still cannot be addressed within these limited design spaces. Because like I'm saying earlier was that if you look into residential houses, it's accommodate domestic usage. And domestic usage means that if you go to a terrace house, you will have a very limited kind of space. Like you go in, you have a porch, you have a living room, you have dining room, you have kitchen at the back. And then when you go up, you have 3-bedroom or 2-bedroom and you have 2 toilets. But that one is actually functional maybe for a very small family, like a family of 5, family of 6, right? But when it tends to become a kindergarten, the number of users increases because this will plus the number of the caregiver, the number of the teachers, the number of the children. And some of the kindergarten, they accommodate like 60 children, 70 children in a small terrace house. And you have like 10 teachers or 5 caregivers. And can you imagine within that small space, there is the classroom, there is the sleeping area, there is the place where they have to cook the food for the children. And there's the place they have to make it as a library. They have a place where they make it like for play space. So the space become compact and the space become crammed. So at the end of the day, there's not enough space actually for the children to move about. And sometimes some of the kindergarten, they make it into sessions. You have the morning session, then you have the evening session. And when you have these 2 sessions, when there is different session comes into place, there are still some kids from the morning session still stays up until the evening session. So at the end of the day, whatever it is, the place still become crowded. So when there's a crowded of place, this comes back to the issue of talking about human needs, the emotional parameters, like where is the sense of safety, where is the sense of attachment, the sense of belongingness, the sense of social interaction. So we missed out within the space, the limited design of space. So this is something that I think we as Malaysians need to look into. Because if we did not take any action into talking about early childhood education, it will affect in terms of the growth and the thinking of the children, in terms of psychological behavior in the later stage, things like that. Yeah.
What about single building kindergartens? Are they, especially in Malaysia, based on your observations, do you think that they're well designed just because they're in single building?
Yeah, but basically most of single building are owned, and the patron is usually by private authorities. So when it is under private authorities, they have land to design. But the problem with the policy in terms of education, early childhood education in Malaysia is that we don't have the guideline to design in terms of the architectural spaces. So at the end of the day, everybody or every owner has their own kind of interpretation to do their own kind of design in terms of kindergarten. So that's the problem, because in terms of the pedagogy, in terms of the curriculum, I'm not going to talk about it because in terms of the curriculum, it's under the MOE, right? In terms of monitoring the quality. But in terms of monitoring the quality of the places and the space making, we still don't have a proper guideline yet. Because when I did the research, in terms of the policy, they only just mentioned that you need to have a certain area of classroom, a certain area of space, but it doesn't tell how are you going to design the space in terms of the guidelines, in terms of the elements and what are the facilities, in terms of what are the fixtures and the fittings that they should embedded into the design of the kindergarten. It's still not there in Malaysia. So that's why you can see in Malaysia there's a lot of variety coming into play. Because this is where the owner of the kindergarten look into more experimental kind of a kindergarten architecture design. And there is no certain benchmark that they can follow. Yeah, so this is the problem. Because most of the spaces that you can see is based on how much financial, security that you have in terms of the ownership. If you have more money, you can design it nicely. But nice, the word nice is not properly defined. How nice is the design is. Yeah. So,
what are the architectural elements that should be focused on in order to make the environment more conducive for kindergarten children?
Yep. Okay. Based on the questionnaires and surveys that we did through few kindergartens in Malaysia and TASPA and things like that, we go to the private ones, we go to the government ones. we did ask the caregivers, the teachers, and we did a study with the children also. They actually want, in terms of 4 important elements. Okay, number 1 is the size of space. The size of space here, meaning that when you build the kindergarten, which means that the anthropometrics of the size of space should cater to the number of users of the students itself, which means the children. So in this sense, when we talk about small children, a place for them to run, a place for them to play, a place for them to learn and things like that. So size of space is very critical in that sense. I won't go very detailed, Hanif, talk about the areas and things like that, but I will just only highlight the important key points here. And number 2 is the zoning and the layout. So when we talk about the zoning and the layout, here it should actually understand in 3 important aspects. Number 1 is the sense of belonging. I will explain a little bit detail what is sense of belonging. Number 2 is having a space that can build a sense of attachment. And number 3 is that build a space that actually have a sense of social interaction. Okay. So if we mention about the sense of belongingness, here is that it is very, very important that the space should design that consider the softscape and the hardscape needs. So the softscape here means that it should look into the features, like how you embed the idea of nature into the design. And then when you talk about hardscape, it's talking about how you embedded also the idea of furniture, fixtures, fittings into the design of the spaces. So in this sense, the spaces has to be designed in a way that it has 2 important features for the informal learning and also for the formal learning. But the most important thing is that to have a lot of recreational spaces where we know as play spaces for the children. And play spaces here means that you need to promote a lot of active movement, especially physical movement of the children. Like you need to have a bigger playground space. You need to have a lot of play structures that address the issue of softscape and also hardscape. And when we talk about the sense of attachment here is that there should be a space that actually induces the feeling of belongingness in children. So for instance, there are a space for the children to put up their things, to showcase their artworks, for instance, to showcase their projects and things like that. And this sense of attachment is not a corner, but it's a fixed space, like a gallery, a small gallery where every work for the students is put it there and showcased. So this will actually promote the idea of sense attachment. The one example that I'm saying is having a gallery, but it can have a lot of different kind of spaces that can actually build sense of attachment in that sense. Okay, and another one is that sense of social interaction. Social interaction is very, very important. So this is where actually when we talk about social interaction is where the space for mingling among the students. Because now if you go into most kindergarten, children within the area of age of 3 years old doesn't mingle much with the children with the age of 4 to 5 years old because they are segregated. 3 to 4 years old into one space, 5-year-old to 6 years old into one space. Because there is no common space for them to integrate. So common space is very important for them. And common space usually can be translated into like playground, play space, and things like that. And adding into that, the third key point, Hanif, is that the equipment, the furniture, the facilities. So this is very important because furniture and facilities need to be properly designed according to the anthropometrics of the children. Because we don't want them to have musculoskeletal disorder, MSD in the future. So the seating, the tables, the eating utensils and things like that should all cater to children's anthropometrics. And lastly is the aesthetic of space. So aesthetic of space is very important because if you understand Gibson's ecological theory of visual perception, aesthetics in terms of color, in terms of image making, this will all give sensory perception of vision into children. So they will feel happy, they will feel security, they will feel safety, and they will have happiness when they go to kindergarten. And another one, the most important thing is that a safe environment. So a risk-free, safe environment that have visible surveillance. So these are some of the key points that are very, very important in designing a kindergarten space for children.
So based on our conversation so far, I think you've highlighted the fact that I think part of the reason why we're not meeting the quote-unquote standards with regard to good kindergarten design is because of perhaps a lack of proper guideline, and also to some extent depends on the financial capabilities of the operators, right, to be able to actually provide these spaces, right, properly, quote-unquote. So do you think that these are so far the two big barriers to designing good kindergartens that's conducive for children, or are there any other barriers with regard to this?
Because I think when you talk about barriers, right? I think is the way Malaysia sees things. Okay. So in this terms, that I think we as Malaysians, we need to change the mindset when we talk about children's rights. Okay. So usually in Malaysia, we only talk about adulthood rights, right? So, but when we talk about children's rights, I'm relating this back to the barrier of children right first, and then we will talk about policy and we'll talk about community awareness. Because when we talk about children rights, when we go into UNICEF, the Convention Rights for Children, UNICEF actually outlined there are 42 aspects. And the most important thing is life development of a child, which is very, very crucial point to be highlighted for all countries, whether you are developing countries, you are well-developed countries or not. So in this sense, when we talk about the sense of life development, it relates closely actually to access for education, to ensure a better livelihood. And in Malaysia itself, in 1995, the Malaysian government actually ratified the United Nations Conventions, the Rights of Children, known as CRC, which actually talking about that all minors below 18 is considered children. And they are actually integrated, or they are actually responsive to this Child Act that is actually ratified in 2001. But when we talk about this, in terms of children rights, most of Malaysians don't have this awareness about children rights. Usually we talk about adult rights. Am I right, Hanif? We talk about gender rights, but nobody debate or question about children's rights actually. But there is actually children rights, and it's fall under the CRC, and it also falls under the UNICEF, the one I mentioned, that 42 aspects earlier, talking about the rights for children to have good access to education. But in Malaysia, this is a problem because nobody have this sense of awareness in that sense. So when you talk about the barrier, yes, I'm agreeing with you because the barrier actually starts from the bottom-up approach. I always like to say the bottom-up approach, which means that the stigma lies in terms of the awareness of the community. So which means that if we as a community doesn't address or doesn't have this awareness in terms of children rights, children access to education, we will remain living like this forever. So which means that there should be a kind of a bottom-up approach from the community itself. So community awareness, community support, community participation is very important to address this issue of children's rights to have better access of education from the early childhood. So this then will move on talking about the top-down approach. Then this will involve the policymakers, which is the government itself. So when we talk about the government itself, policymakers also need to be aware in terms of best childhood education. We are now moving into having a good kind of a quality of pedagogy and curriculum. But we also need to look into a good kind of a built environment, on how we're going to assist together hand in hand a good pedagogy with a good built environment. And in this sense, policymakers do play a major role, Hanif. And what I'm stressing here is that at least we need to have a proper guideline in designing a better childhood education centers in Malaysia. So it's high time we need to make a change for that one.
All right. Okay. So based on what you've learned from your research here, how can this knowledge then be applied to also help improve other public spaces to make them friendlier, more accessible, and also safer for kids?
When I talk about early childhood education, child's place to learn doesn't only limit in kindergarten. because the world is their space. And when you mentioned about public facilities, public spaces, like parks, and then we have like other places like public areas and things like that. They need to have these better design guidelines also. Because if you go out into like park designs, of course, you in a bigger park, or you will have public parks, you have playgrounds, but playground is only where they design to cater for the need of children. But what about other spaces other than playground inside a public park, for example? Like you have the sittings, you have the furniture, you have the cafeterias, place to eat and things like that. So this is where we need to consider also, like I go back to CRC, which is the children's rights in terms of that sense. So which means that when we talk about equality, living in a bigger society, when we talk about gender, background, age group, the built environment should cater for all the age group. And now most of the consideration is given a lot to the adulthood, which is the adult rights. We don't look into child rights. So for instance, if you go to shopping centers, right? So most of shopping centers spaces, public spaces, now they are talking about having toilets or washroom for children, which is quite good. And I really support a positive support movement on that one. And they're now having cinema for children. GSC is having a nice place cinema for children. They called it play movie space for children and for family gathering and things like that. So this is a good initiative. When we have this kind of awareness and understanding, we actually can have this children design architecture everywhere, including religious spaces like mosque. If you go to mosque, you go to church, you go to temple, why not? We should embed this children architecture into religious institution also. So this is where I think awareness from society has to slowly change itself. So it is not for profit making, but we talk about the generation for the future. So if we want to make Malaysia a high quality of living for all age group, it has to start from the roots, which is the children itself. Yeah.
You've been tuning in to I Love KL, and we've been talking about kindergarten architecture and design. Joining me on the show to speak about that was Elisa Bruna Ismail, an associate professor from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia. That's all we have for this episode of I Love KL. If you miss any part of the show, you can look for the podcast on our website, bfm.my/ilovekl. Alternatively, you can also download our app, which is available on both Google Play and the App Store. I Love KL can also be found on Spotify and other streaming platforms. Don't forget to also follow the station on X at BFM Radio. My name is Hanif Baharudin. You have been tuning in to I Love KL, bringing you closer to the people and places of our capital city. Join us again next week, only on BFM 89.9, the business station.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.